Dear guests, I would like to welcome you to this meeting hosted by Vardberg, the Atlantic Association in Iceland, and University of Reykjavik. For us Icelanders, Nordic cooperation is crucial. We can move almost unhindered between Scandinavian countries for study, work, and business. This cooperation spans nearly all areas of our societies and has been so successful that we often take that for granted. However, it is a result of close dialogue, respect, and friendship between our nations. Our cooperation is rooted in historical and cultural ties, sharing basic values and interests. The Nordic countries are a region of great economic strength and rich societal capital, where everyone has the right to enjoy themselves. This cooperation extends increasingly to our friends in the Baltic states. We believe that bridges are better than walls. Diversity is strength, and equality is an excellent economic policy. We promote innovation for nature conservation and vibrant business life. We stand up for democracy, the rule of law, and human rights. In security matters, the Nordic countries are collaborating more and more. Recent examples include cybersecurity, work on financial stability, and law enforcement against international crime. This cooperation is also increasingly involves defense security collaboration. The new long-term strategy on Nordic defense cooperation until 2030, signed by the Nordic defense minister in April, bears witness of that. With that said, I would like to give the floor to Diljá, Ms. Einarsdóttir, who until this week was the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee of our Parliament. In order to make this short and successful, I've asked her also to moderate the event. Thank you. Diljá, the floor is yours.
So, dear guests, dear friends, as chairman of the Icelandic Foreign Affairs Committee, I had the privilege to work closely with the Nordic and Baltic colleagues within what we call the NB8 cooperation, a term everyone here should know by now. Since I was with the Minister for Foreign Affairs before, I then learned how special and important this cooperation is. And it became one of my favorite things to do in work, working with these friends and neighbors of ours, typically during long political working sessions and travels, but they of course came with a lot of fun and laughter in between. I came to respect my colleagues highly and believe it is of great value for us here today to listen to their perspectives on global challenges. And that is why I approached Vardberg about organizing this open meeting and have to thank the chairman, Davíð Stefánsson, for his efforts. Icelanders are concerned about the changed security landscape in Europe, but even so, as we are somewhat more distant from current threats, I think it's necessary for the voices of our Nordic Baltic friends to be part of the public debate here in Iceland. With a lot of pressing topics in mind, let's begin our discussion. Without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Aron Emilsson, Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Swedish Parliament, to take the floor. Aron.
Thank you, dear Diljá, and thanks for the invitation to this event. I must first and foremost thank also our Icelandic hosts for the hospitality and the incredible start of this joint meeting these days. Louder? Is this on? I guess so. To speak out. Well, of course, as all of us in this room knows, we face a world of where geopolitical and security policy challenges are more prominent than for decades, perhaps since the Second World War. It's clear for us, for our region, here in the Northern Europe and in the Arctic and the Baltic Sea region, but where we live, but of course also worldwide. And these areas are once again geopolitical hotspots, perhaps hotter than the hot springs of Iceland even. But other hotspots is of course the Middle East, South China Sea, and in our own immediate area, Ukraine, of course. And I would say that the security landscape has seen a profound transformation in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The war has destabilized, of course, Eastern Europe. It has shaken the foundations of the European security order, and it made Sweden, for instance, which I represent, to give up more than 200 years of military non-alignment and apply for membership in the NATO alliance. And I think I would like to frame that this is a topic and a title that we can talk about for hours, but to frame some angle of this, I would like to point out how these geopolitical and security policy hotspots are interlinked with each other in some way. Because I think that's interesting to be able to look at the greater picture and also to find the right mechanisms and tools to address the geopolitical issues and the security policy tensions where we are exploring them and where we are monitoring them. I mean, to start with Northern Europe and our immediate region and neighborhood, Russia's and China's more and more forward-leaning cooperation in the Arctic is concerning, of course, and how, of course, hence the climate changes, but also in general the security policy cooperation is being strengthened and deepened when it comes to the ability to make research and scientific studies, but also to control the new and perhaps in the future also more open trade routes and possibilities in this region. And when we now see that China is hand in hand walking with Russia in Europe in general, creating new trade investments deals with Belarus, exercising in the Arctic, exercising in the Baltic Sea for just a few years ago, and once again showed themselves there during the summer. This is, of course, a sign that the Russian full-scale invasion towards Ukraine is not isolated to the situation on the ground in Ukraine. We have Russia, China, Iran cooperating and strengthening their will to challenge the rules-based world order in general. We have Iranian proxy warriors in the Middle East getting fed by the affairs they have with the Russian war machine. And we see how China and Russia are trying to increase their influence and also to consolidate their influence in Africa, making national states of Africa dependent on China and Russia, and at the same time how they are strengthening their bonds and ties in the high north. So in some way we have these three authoritarian regimes, Russia, China, Iran, surrounding the Western democracies, but also our way of thinking of international law and order and the rules-based world order in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, towards Taiwan, and, as I said, in the Middle East. And I think this is the key to, in some way, understand that we need to work with strengthening the transatlantic link and, of course, the cooperation with the US, but also be able to reach out to the global south and other parts in the world and make better deals and better agreements and more polite agreements than actually the China and the Russia and other authoritarian states are willing to offer. because this is the key also to benchmark and also to compete with the influence over the global agenda that, of course, China, Russia, and Iran is creating together. So we need to meet the destabilization and the weaponization and militarization in our own region and other regions with joint strategies. I think a tool in that could be a joint, more of a joint NATO strategy for Arctic and the High North in a more executive way than we have seen so far to address the challenges we see. And of course, to make every effort we are able to make to, for the long stand, firmly, solid support Ukraine in their struggle for peace and freedom in Ukraine, because they are the first line of defense, even for us and for our safety and of course possibility to live in peace and self-determination. So here we have a huge challenge, but I think with the Nordic Baltic perspective, we are able to address this jointly, and our voice is much more higher. It's much more respected. It's much more listened to if we are use it together and jointly in every aspect, in every international fora, than coming alone and try to pitch an idea. So I truly believe in the Nordic Baltic cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Aron. And next, I would like to invite Ms. Ine Eriksen Søreide, Chair of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee of the Norwegian Parliament, to take the floor. Ine.
Present here today. I just want to say at the outset that I've had the pleasure of knowing Diljá for many, many years. When she was working with Gudlaugur, I was foreign minister, and it was such a pleasure to see her take the position also as chair of the committee. Having said that, we had a wonderful introduction with Johan, just a week old in the game, but had a very nice introduction yesterday during dinner and the meetings today. So I'm confident that this collaboration will continue very well. So I think I would like to build on much of what Aron said, and I think we could take a tour de table around the world and see that all of the conflicts and all of the negative developments that we're experiencing today are underpinning each other in ways we are not used to seeing. But instead of going into all of them, since we have limited amount of time, I would just try to bring them all together in our area, in the Nordic Baltic area, and to see how they play out. I think that one of the main messages and lessons that we have to take with us in today's situation is that we should not be naive and think that we're coming back to some sort of normality anytime soon, or ever for that matter. What we're experiencing today, very challenging for all of us. It's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unpredictability, but that is the new normal. We have to deal with it. We have to deal with the world as it plays out in front of us, as we are a part of, and not think that we will click back to normal again, give it 2 or 3 or 5 years. And there are so many reasons for it, and I think all of you here know full well many of the reasons, but I just think we have to realize that the situation where different conflicts and different features around the world will underpin each other, where we see a closer collaboration between not only Russia and China and Iran, but also North Korea as a spoiler that has to be reckoned with in this company. This is part of the new situation. The other thing we have to realize is that Russia is not going to be a different country anytime soon. I think all of us made a mistake in the early 2000s or after the end of the Cold War to think that if we only engaged Russia enough, they would become like us. They did not, but bear in mind that they were a strategic partner of NATO up until 2010, or beyond 2010, actually, from the strategic concept in 2010. It's very hard to imagine today, but that was the reality because we genuinely believed that kind of dialogue would get us in a different place with Russia. So I always underline that the Russia that we see brutally invading Ukraine is not a different Russia from the Russia that is the neighbor of many of our countries. And The third point I would like to make is that given this situation, we also have to broaden our mind and scope when we look into what kind of threats that are posed to us. We can think about the old-fashioned, in a way, conventional military threats, where we see a main battle tank rolling over a border or the airspace being violated. That's still a major part of it, but it's also added on with other threats, hybrid threats, cyber, the way Russia especially, but also China and others would like to destabilize our open democracies. And it's a very easy thing to do. It's low cost, it's deniable, and it's very, very effective. So all of this, in addition to what is becoming more and more important in the Russian military doctrine, namely the nuclear component, is something that we have to take into account. And again, bringing this back to the Nordic Baltic region, much of these capabilities that are largely unused in the war against Ukraine, they are right outside our door in the north. They're becoming more and more prominent in the doctrines and thinking of Russia, and we have to take that into account. That is also why we have been working so closely in this circuit of Nordic Baltic countries for so many years on helping each other out with security. We have been doing, to our great pleasure, Iceland air policing for a long time, most recently in the spring of 2024. And this has been going on between our countries for a long time. Now Sweden and Finland is fully on board NATO. We're so happy to have both of you on board. And it opens up a whole range of new opportunities. Now all of the Nordic and Baltic countries are joined in NATO. It has an immense impact on what we actually can do together. But it also is demanding for all of us because we have to step up our game in this region because we're faced with a new set of threats. In my opinion, the old kind of slogan of high north, low tension cannot be used anymore in the same sense. And it has different reasons. One is that we see new actors in the north. Aron mentioned the relationship between Russia and China, which in my opinion is one of the most concerning ones. Russia have up until now been able to keep China to a certain extent at bay, saying that, well, this is our area. Now they're not able to anymore because they depend so heavily on China for their economy, for the war in Ukraine. And that is also why the balance of power between them will change. Climate change, the ice is melting, commercial routes are opening up, and more actors are wanting to have a footprint in the Arctic. Many of them with the entry point of something civilian like research, but we should not be fooled into thinking that this is only what I would say a nice activity that all of us could join into. This is about geopolitics. This is about power. And if you look at how a country like India is now playing a lot of a bigger role and wanting to play a bigger role in the Arctic, it has to do with trying to stem China. And that's taking place in our immediate neighborhood. We also need to look into, and that's my second final point, we also need to look into what kind of situation globally affects the US ability to be present in the north. The US is stretched. The US is stretched between the Asia Pacific, between the high north, between the US. And of course, with a shrinking US Navy, that is something that is going to have effect for us as well. And I saw some figures the other day, which I think is quite, I would say, illuminating, that the capacity of China to build new vessels, new ships, far, far outpaces the US. So for every one vessel the US is able to build, China is able to build 254. And it's easy to imagine that many actors would have an interest in keeping the US occupied more places at the same time. And using that as a kind of a shoehorn into this is probably quite likely. So the last thing I wanted to say is that in the Nordic Baltic circuit, we are very, very tightly knit. And we see it in so many areas that our security from one of the countries' side depend heavily on the security of the others. And when the Baltic states feel threatened in a different way from Russia than many of us have before, we have to take that seriously and understand both the historical reasons and the immediate impact of Russia on our neighboring countries. When we are thinking about the future, thinking ahead, we also have to take into account that Russia, as we know it today, will not change substantially in the foreseeable future. So we have to deal with an aggressive Russia that will continue the war in Ukraine for as long as they see fit. And that is also why the collaboration between all of us here is just going to be even more important. We all have to do our part of the work. We have to do it together. And in my opinion, the Nordic Baltic region, since we're now gathered, all of us in NATO, has probably never been stronger or in a better shape to actually deal with today's security challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Ine. And for the first Baltic voice of this session, I would like to ask Ms. Irma Kalnina, Vice Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Latvian Parliament, to take the floor.
First of all, I'd like to thank Ina for everything she said. In every tragic moment, we have to look at a bright side. And the bright side is that we have each other, that we have acknowledged the fact that we need to work together, we need to understand and listen to each other. As a Latvian whose parents had to escape from Latvia and go to New York, where I was born, I know what it means to lose everything. I know what it means when your whole family is deported to Siberia for 17 years in the slave labor camps. And I cringe when I think of today's geopolitical aspects and the goals that individual countries have. What are their goals? What do they want to attain? A new world order that your children, your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren will have to live in? Do we have the wherewithal and the courage and the determination to fight it? To give Ukraine long-range weapons so they can go into Russia and fight? Do we have that? Do we understand what South Korea, Iran, and China are trying to do, also in Israel? Do we really understand what's going on with the Trump administration and the deep pockets that will change world order? I want my 4 grandsons to live in a free Latvia, and I'm sure you want your children to live in your free countries too. But we're at war right now. We don't say that. We say that Ukraine and Russia are, but we all are at war right now. We are defending ourselves. And if the European Defense Initiative doesn't go forward, where we will start procurements, where we will start a military expansion, then we can't wait for the US. They were asleep after World War II, as we all were in Europe. And now we have to rev up and do something. The US cannot make, as Ina said, enough ships. They won't give the money right away. All the promises that they gave are now on hold because of the election, because everything hinges upon an election. When I was in Portugal for the Global South with NATO, I understood what Wagner Group is doing in Africa. I understood that border patrol in Portugal, in Lisbon, is at high risk right now. And the Global South told us at that point, you need to think about Global North, the High North. You need to concentrate on the High North. What is happening here in the Arctic, not only from climate change, but as we said, routes open to China. What is Iceland's role with China right now? What is your migration and immigration like among your people? It's slowly, it creeps in. And it's not my position today to say anything about what your government is doing, but please open up your eyes. Is this where we're going? Is it follow the money, or is it follow democracy and freedom? I will keep my remarks short because I know my colleagues have a lot to say, but as NATO Parliamentary Assembly, I'm proud of the fact that I can work with my colleagues that are standing next to me on a united front. We have never been as united. We'll forget about Orban for a moment, okay? Because I was in Budapest last week and I can tell you the news isn't very good. How do we isolate that type of mentality? How do we look to Germany on the alternative for Germany that is now gaining influence? It's happening. It's slowly creeping in. Is it creeping in Latvia? In our parliament, yes, we have the opposition that are Putinites. It's the way it is in a country that was occupied for 50 years. It doesn't automatically leave us. So it's part of my party, New Unity Party, and the coalition to work against it and protect Latvia so it doesn't go any further, and to work with Estonia and Lithuania, Sweden and Finland and Norway and Iceland to protect our countries. So I appreciate you listening to me. If you have any questions, I can help understand a little bit more about American mentality. I head the US Friendship Group. I head the Canadian Friendship Group. And I look at transatlantic initiatives more now than ever. We need to talk to them. We need to be united and tell them that the NB8 insists on more help. Insists, not asks, but insists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Irma. And back to the Nordics, I would like to ask Mr. Kimmo Kiljunen, Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Finnish Parliament, to take the floor.
Thank you very much. Thanks all of you being here together. And I was surprised how many people we have here actually meeting at the university level. And it's a somewhat also academic exercise, although we are politicians and we are looking obviously forward very much from a political point of view. Thanks very much. It's so nice to work together with the NB8 group. Small countries in Europe, Northern Europe, are obviously having lots of common interests, not only because the geopolitical position is a crucial one and determines also very much about our attitude, how to address the world and how we look at it. Thank you very much for your opening statement. I take only one phrase out of that one, very interesting. It's better to build bridges than walls. It's, as we are frequently saying in Finland, it's better to have made gates than walls. And we are saying, I'm coming from Helsinki, the city of Helsinki spirit, the place for Helsinki Final Accord, the place which obviously gave the basis for New Europe, which emerged after the Cold War, New Europe, which have actually the basics premises so that we also see the security of Europe, security of the world, but particularly Europe in a way that it's not only military confrontation which is playing the game. We shouldn't only look from that perspective, we should also look at the broader terms, security. It's much more than military issues. We were obviously speaking about the confidence building and cooperative security instead of contradictions. And obviously also that we are not only speaking about security of states, but security of human citizens. So that's why human rights are big players. I'm also very much involved on Europe, Council of Europe, works of us. So that was the Helsinki spirit, cooperative world. Somebody said here, we can see obviously that after this brutal aggression by Russia against Ukraine, breaking straight away, permanent member of Security Council breaking the basic rules of UN Charter, territorial integrity and sovereignty respect, is totally obviously different situation. The security situation, the security architecture we try to create, meaning cooperative security, has gone. It's absolutely gone. And we had also to change our position as military neutral country to join to NATO. We may join to NATO absolutely by these statements, which our President Einarsdóttir put it very, very clearly when signing this ratification papers. We are doing this not against anybody. Nobody loses anything. We are doing it precisely because Finland's security needs, Finnish citizens' security. That is our basis to look also the future. And in that way, your argumentation, speaking about bridges, not a war, it's a very, very crucial aspect, because we cannot build actually the future seriously if we are only looking at the whole world and globe in terms of contradictions. We discussed today in the Arctic what its Arctic means, is that actually that we must look at from the contradictions, or should we actually have in aim cooperative world? Should we actually think the ways to cooperate also? Because there are also essential questions for us which demands obviously cooperation. For us, Finland, the brutal aggression against Ukraine, I'm putting very bluntly our position. 22nd of February, 24th of February 2022 wasn't the date for us. For us, the date is obviously 30th of November 1939. Same brutal aggression, and we were alone. We were alone. Sweden helped a little bit voluntary way, Denmark also a little bit voluntary way, but principally we were alone. And we said clearly, Ukraine will not be alone. We will support it. It's an existence question for you and for all of us. So that's not to say, that's very clear. But at the same time, we are looking the world anyhow. Let's try to find the ways, not only looking at through contradictions, polarization, blocks, because we cannot actually survive in the end only with the contradicting world. That's not the possibility. Pity to say today, yes, we must invest on armaments. Yes, Finland is also investing on armaments today. Whole Europe is investing, true, but that's not actually the end of the game. It cannot be, otherwise it is an end of the game. So we must obviously try to look that the armaments are means, not goals. Security you don't build up on armaments in a serious way, long term, because it's a vicious circle. And arms race is not the answer. We must at the end come to the situation, if it's naivety or not naivety, that we really start to discuss back about arms control, confidence building, how to cooperate. Then comes our president who said, Sauli Niinistö, and now stop also new president saying, we must get back, and I'm coming from Helsinki spirit, back the situation that we try to trust and build up certain issues. And obviously today it's very much so. Climate change, biodiversity, these are challenges for mankind. We must speak about pandemics. That's an issue. Misuse of the high technologies, a major issue. There are lots of issues, even at the end, war and peace issues. These are common for us to solve, and we need the others. Don't build up the world. They are the others, and we good and bad. There is no solution. We must actually have at the end the cooperative world, and we need all those what we are now naming as our enemies, also part and parcel to solve the mankind problems. Thank you very much.
Mr. Marko Mihkelsson, who is chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Estonian Parliament. Marko knows the current challenges firsthand, and during our mutual trip to Kyiv in the beginning of this year, Marko actually ended the trip by going to the front lines in Ukraine, as he does every other few months. So Marko, please.
Thank you so much, Diljá. Our host here, it's incredibly important actually for us to stand in front of you and to actually have a very frank conversation, because In one way, the group you see here, NBA, Nordic Baltic countries, us together actually are the one very unique cooperation between countries in today's world. Hardly you can see similar cooperation anywhere else in the world. We are so like-minded. We are in the same defense alliance nowadays. We understand the world the very same way. And actually this format of the chairs of foreign affairs committees of Nordic Baltic countries was established already 21 years ago. So we have worked together ever since in 2003. Can you imagine what world we had, or Europe we had that time? Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, we weren't that time even the members of EU and NATO. But as Diljá mentioned, yes, I have been since February 22 7 times in Ukraine, and most of those trips I also used the time to go with friends and volunteers and others to front lines to understand better what is happening right now at the most important place on earth, perhaps, not saying in Europe. And last August, during one of my trips, one of the commanders of Ukrainian brigade asked me very directly, without any additional words, "Are you ready for a war?" Because he knows he's a hero of Ukraine. He knows what kind of force is today trying to destroy not only Ukraine as a state, Ukrainians as a nation, but he knows well there on the front line that this force, if not stopped and defeated, will go on and launch war, not only in Ukraine, but also against our countries. Putin hasn't made a secret about his plans, as much as President Xi in China the same way. They actually argue openly nowadays that what is happening in Ukraine, their aggression against Ukraine, is not only to attempt to change geopolitical reality in Europe or in the eastern part of Europe, but it is a part of a much bigger war, much bigger battle, that is to change world order, to really derail the Western, specifically American influence on a world level, on a world order. And this is exactly what is in the interest of China as well. Last year, when President Xi visited Moscow, he said famously that the changes we see today, humankind hasn't seen for 100 years, and the drivers of the changes are Russia and China. And this is why it is so critical to not only to help Ukraine today to defend its country and the sovereignty and territorial integrity, but it is so important if we want to be part of those who will define future of our children and grandchildren, that we have to defeat fascist Russia in their war of aggression against Ukraine. Unfortunately, as we also debated this morning among friends, there are not so good news out there, and perspective is not very positive. Russia is winning, China is winning at this particular moment. The major changes in our allied countries like the United States or Germany or some other places are not indicating that there is somewhere the leader who could really stand up and say, enough is enough. We have to get ready to fight and fight this war to the victorious end. Otherwise, as Irma mentioned, we are going to sleep still, not knowing that we are already at war. And this is what is happening right now. not only in Europe, where the major war is going on, but also in the Middle East, in Sahel region, the tensions around Korean Peninsula or Taiwan Strait, they are all interconnected and very much connected to this outcome. What is going to happen in case of Russia's aggression against Ukraine? I would like to argue, and this is important for all of us to understand, that our people of Nordic Baltic countries, have been leading voice, have been leading in terms of support to Ukraine. If you check the list of countries who have spent their resources helping Ukraine, all our countries top the list. And unfortunately, the major allies who have a capability and capacity to actually make a change, they are afraid of Russia. But you know that if you are afraid of Russia, you are going to lose. This is why I argue today with the words of former president of the United States, the leader we actually miss so much today, Ronald Reagan, when he was challenged early 80s, what is your strategy? And Reagan said, this is very simple. We will win, they will lose. That should be our strategy today as well. Thank you.
And he even quoted Reagan. So next I will invite my friend and our friend Mr. Michael Astrup Jensen, Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Danish Parliament, to take the floor.
Well, thank you so much, and also a huge thanks to our Icelandic host for both organizing the meetings we have so far, but also this arrangement here in the university. And I feel like home because you have all these posters of executive MBA. I just started one, so I almost feel at home. But coming back to a more serious topic, and that is the geopolitical trends that is going on. And of course, we in the Kingdom of Denmark, and I use that expression, Kingdom of Denmark, because that includes both Denmark and then the Faroe Islands and Greenland. We experience on ourselves the threats that are generating against all of us, from especially Russia, but also in some extent from China. And, you know, a lot of people are saying we were surprised about what happened almost 2.5 years ago when Russia made the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. But why? Because if you look on what Mr. Putin, did before that, we shouldn't be surprised. He occupied part of 3 European countries, Georgia, Moldova, and then, of course, part of Ukraine. So, and if you also look upon what he's been saying in all of those years, he's always been saying he wants to be a major superpower, then people should be respecting that, and also have his so-called security space regarding that as well. So we are sensing, and not only sensing, but also experiencing a Russia that is being extremely aggressive against all of us. And as my dear friend Marco said, Russia right now is winning on the battlefield. So in my views, this is a wake-up call to all of us. If we're right now not doing what it should be doing on the battlefield in Ukraine, we will all lose. Because what will happen then? Then the threats against all our countries, including Iceland, including Denmark, Norway, and so on, will increase by a lot. So right now, it's beneficial for all of us to make sure that Ukraine does not lose. And we're doing what we can from our side. We're very proud that we are just said yes in my committee to the 20th donation package to Ukraine. We are also very proud that according to Kiel Institute, that we are number 1 from Danish perspective in per GDP in donating the most to Ukraine. We are also very proud that we are, with our Dutch and also Norwegian friends, are right now educating F-16 fighter pilots in Denmark so they can receive even more F-16s. We gave them all our artillery pieces. We haven't even received them all from France when we bought them. We shipped them directly to Ukraine. We're giving them also new battle tanks and old ones, both Leopard 1 and 2. And according to open sources, this is not confidential, Danish supplied Leopard tanks are right now in Russian territory, part of the Ukrainian incursion into Kursk. And we've all been doing that in my committee by unanimous vote. We have 12 political parties in the Danish parliament, from left to right. All of them are supporting this. And why? Because we cannot let Ukraine lose. And one of the things that I actually agreeing with Donald Trump about, it's not much, but I'm agreeing with Donald Trump on one issue. And that is, this is Europe's war, primarily. And when I'm staying by that is that, in one hand, US, of course, should be supplying the necessary weapons to Ukraine. But it's difficult for us to having this argument when bigger European countries like France, like Germany, but also small European countries, rich, smaller European countries, are not doing as much as they should. And therefore, my biggest outcry today is actually saying to all of Europe, we should do more. And then we can pressure the Americans to also do more. But if we do not even want to do more in Europe, how can we even pressure the Americans to do it? We cannot. And therefore, I really hope that when Denmark is now gearing up to being part of the upcoming presidency of the European Union, we can do a lot with that in trying to pressure our European Union friends to do more, and also in NATO perspective as well. And if you're looking on people saying that, isn't there a diplomatic solution to all of this? Why aren't you pressuring China or anything like that to saying, how can you, China, pressure Russia to stop the war? Let's be frank in this room. And stating the obvious, why should China agree to that? What is China's goal? China's goal is to destabilize the West's position as a superpower. They want to become the #1 superpower in their own right, both an economic one, military one, and so on. So why should they agree to any diplomatic solution that we put forward that jeopardized that, position? Of course, they have this very, very, long-term perspective that is very, very difficult for us. But then you can ask to all our Nordic Baltic countries, why should we help China achieving that goal? And that's why we, from the Danish side, implemented a new law called the screening law, where we're actually trying to protect our critical infrastructure, from telecommunication to ports to airports, whatever, so that China will not be able to control what we call critical infrastructure. That is implemented now, and we are talking with our very, very close Greenlandic home rule colleagues, and they will also implement it very, very soon in Greenland as well. And I really, really say with very, very, as directly as I can, this is very important that all of us in the Nordic Baltic stand together regarding this, so we can keep the Chinese pressure out of the Arctic region as well. Thank you so much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Michael. And finally, in this round, I would like to ask Mr. Giedrius Surplus, Vice Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Lithuanian Parliament, to take the floor.
Thank you, Diljá. Thank you, Johan, for greeting us. Thank you, Bjarni, for all the wonderful trips to Kiev on train. We have spent nights traveling to Kiev with many of colleagues here in support of Ukraine. And we really do a lot together amongst the Nordic Baltic countries, the Nordic Baltic 8, or the MB8, as Diljá just branded. But sometimes it looks like we are looking at the mirror, talking to ourselves, because really we are like-minded. And I think it's very good to support each other. It's very good to push each other towards the bigger investment into the defense, and now the Baltics are above 3% of the GDP. The Nordics are catching up. But the situation, the geopolitical situation in the world, and especially amongst our allies, really pushes us, the Nordic Baltic 8, to go out and try to persuade our partners, our allies, that democracy, that freedom, international law are still values worth fighting for. And you know, as to me, as to a Lithuanian, it's a very special thing to be in Iceland for the first time, to be honest, but not the last, I hope, to see Minister Emilsson here, because Iceland to any Lithuanian is a very special country. You were the first to acknowledge our independence, and we are really thankful for that forever and ever. Amen. But why am I mentioning this again and again? Now, it looks like some of our allies, some of the countries of the world believe or started believing that Ukraine doesn't have this right. Back then in 1990s and before, the US President Reagan had this ambition. Iceland had this ambition. Back in the Second World War, Churchill had this ambition. Now it looks like we are somehow lost because we are giving Ukraine too little and too late. We are setting red lines to ourselves, not to Russia, who is an aggressor. And this is what we were discussing this morning as well. And this is what the world or our allies seem to realize finally. You cannot win a war if you don't have a strategy. You cannot win a war if your target or your strategy is not to lose the war. You know, I'm a chess player myself, and sometimes when you are stronger against your opponent, you take off the rook or the queen just, you know, to make the game equal. Our economies are 10 times stronger than that of Russia. Our army is stronger than, not Lithuania's, NATO's army, is stronger than Russia's army. But it seems to me that we are taking the rooks and the bishops and the queens and the knights off the board and telling Ukraine, now you go and defend yourself with no long-range weapons, etc. And you know, I like to provoke the audiences when I speak abroad, asking, can you please raise your hands who believe that Russia can be defeated, actually? A much better situation than to that I saw in the conference in Budapest last week, where only 10% said that they believe that Russia can be defeated. And one of the scholars there, she said, it's not a question about if Russia can be defeated. Of course, it can be defeated. It's a question of price. What price are we going to pay? And yes, there are threats of nuclear weapons. And yes, we in Lithuania, and I'm sure in Estonia, Latvia, and other countries believe that Ukraine did this provocation in Kursk region just to show that it's bluff. They are not capable. They are not willing to risk that, you know, Armageddon. So here we are, frightened against an enemy who is much weaker and trying to convince ourselves that, well, let's think of any reason not to let Ukraine do this war for us, do this war using the weapons that we created that are meant to, you know, to aim at victory, not to use these weapons as probable as they should be. So that's the question. And really, I think we, the frontline states, as we call ourselves, we, the Nordic Baltics, who have lived with Russia for ages, who I'm sure each of us has or many of us have the Independence Day, the statehood day, which is from Russia, just like many countries in Europe. We are the ones who must be very vocal. Should somebody win elections in the US, we should be very vocal, convincing the Hungarians that, well, there is no such thing as peace on Russia's terms. Because let me remind you, Putin started this full-scale aggression with an ultimatum to NATO countries. Well, maybe I won't invade if you withdraw the NATO troops from the new NATO member states. Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Finland and Sweden were not there yet, but still. I mean, if you have read a book called Putin's People by Catherine Belton, who has spent her life analyzing how Putin thinks, reacts, and constructs the world, there is no such thing as peace with Putin. Orban goes to Moscow to negotiate peace, and the next day he leaves. Putin strikes to the children's hospital in Kiev. So, you know, he's been bluffing and he's been fooling us around, and we seem to be setting any reasons for us not to have victory achieved. And here, one more thing to those who argue that, well, we have to be smart and, you know, make this war stop with no casualties, with no Third World War and things like that. Just weeks ago, a Shahed drone landed happily in Latvia with explosions. Thanks God it didn't explode in air, but it happened. We had this jamming of GPS signals in Finland and Estonia, thanks to which, or due to which, the civil planes cannot land properly. We had a fire in IKEA store in Vilnius, allegedly set by the criminals aligned with or linked to the FSB. We had a similar fire in Poland in a military factory, killing 50 and more people. So, the war is creeping to us. I wouldn't dare saying that we are at war, and let's hope we won't be at war. But I mean, it is creeping to us. So no matter how vigilant or sensitive or whatever we are, you know, à la guerre comme à la guerre, that's the world. So we as the Nordic Baltics, we again take this mission of, you know, traveling the world, speaking to the world, and especially our allies, that this is the time where Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran have felt our weakness, and we just cannot let it happen. Thank you.
So, dear friends, since we are pressed for time, I am going to take the liberty of raising one last question, or maybe, actually, I was going to raise one last question, but instead, I have changed my mind. I am going to ask you to do me a favor. And I promised the new chairman of the committee, Johan, to keep the time schedule, so I'll ask you to keep it short. You have all mentioned the challenges we are facing in Ukraine, and I say we, because I'm bearing in mind the trip we had to DC in the beginning of the year, where our American friends, they all responded, yes, we hear what you're saying, but it's a you problem. It's first and foremost, it's Europe's problem. So I'm going to ask all of you, starting with Marco and going all the way through the group, to give your Icelandic friends an advice, friendly advice from Nordics and Baltics, people with great experience in foreign affairs, in politics, our friends in the Nordics, our friends that have been living close to our friends, former friends in Russia, even people who have lived under Soviet Union. Can you please give us some advice? Because we are, of course, as you are having yourselves, we are hearing voices here about reminding us that we were once very close with Russia, that we have had great friendship with Russia. What is your advice to the Icelandic nation? Thank you.
Thank you, Tito, for easy question, but perhaps you know, what we witness and what did you hear from us is nothing kind of positive. The perspectives are rather dark for all of us. And as Ina mentioned, those who think that there is a way back to the prior to February 22 world, unfortunately, this isn't the case. The world is in the middle of major changes, and for us, it's important, of course, to survive in this world, to help survive Ukraine and others who defend us right now against this major threat we haven't seen since the end of World War II. And to do that is the only way additional to helping Ukraine and not getting tired, because Ukrainians are not getting tired. Those who are fighting, they just say that, we cannot give up because we know what's going to happen. Russians will come, kill everybody, deport everybody, destroy the country, as we have seen what they have done in the eastern part of Ukraine right now. So additional to that is to take seriously defense and cooperation between our allied countries, because this part of the world, Nordic Baltic, enjoys first time in history unity, what we never have seen. We are all NATO allied countries, and this is perhaps important for all of us to pay more attention to what each of us can do and contribute to the collective defense and deterrence. That Russians or whoever would like to threaten us, they must understand that the war, if they will initiate it against one of the NATO allies or against NATO, is going to be catastrophic for them. They have to understand that. They have to understand that we are ready to defend us. And this is why perhaps for Iceland it is also important to check the budget lines for defense or self-defense, or the areas of civil defense. This is something that is incredibly important. Thank you.
Well, I think it's the Nordic countries who should be giving advice to the Baltic countries. But still, first thing from our history, no free lunch when we speak about Russia and China. And if you get cheap gas, you get corruption with it. If you get Chinese investment, you get political pressure with it, etc., etc. So this is one thing. The second thing is, I think it was mentioned. I think Diljá, you said that Americans say that it's Europe's war. It is Europe's war. It is a war in Europe. But should Ukraine fall, China will do whatever. NATO will be teethless, because we were threatening. We sent all that we could to Ukraine and we lost. So, Putin, Xi, Iran, North Korea, they are unstoppable then. And I think this is what the US should take into account.
As I listen to my colleagues, I'm wondering, what else can I tell you that's unique and interesting? I go back to Diljá's question about what the Americans think that it's our war. I think that they have forgotten that we are all connected. Economically, we are all connected. Our markets are all connected. And if we should experience the domino effect, where Russia is victorious, Ukraine falls, the Balts perhaps are next, maybe Poland, it will affect everyone globally. And I think it's very short-sighted to think that it won't. I think it's short-sighted to think that BRICS, India and South America won't have ramifications from this as well. Because if an authoritarian governments take over, democracy is dead. And I think that is something that we really need to think about. What did your forefathers fight for? Peace, democracy, rule of law, territorial integrity. I'm afraid what's going to happen to the Baltic Sea. If a geopolitical situation arises, where do we go? Because right now, the way it's divided is either between Norfolk or Brunswick. So where is the Baltic Sea? Who will protect us? So perhaps that's a little bit different than what the question was, but I had to say that anyway. Who's going to protect the 20,000 children that have been stolen and are now living in Russia under different identities? What about our grandchildren? Would we want to have them stolen, deported? Certainly not. So all of these emotional, perhaps it's a female that's talking about this, but I feel it down to my core. that this is something that we have to be victorious. We have to be victorious. If Latvia has given over 3.2 of our GDP to military spending, our education hurts, our health hurts, because we have to cut our budgets all around just to give to military spending. But luckily, we are enough farsighted in our leadership that understands that we have to do this. And I'm sure Estonia and Lithuania have to bite the bullet and sacrifice monies that should have been spent otherwise. But we can't. We have to give everything that we can to the military. And I think that's something that in Iceland, I'd like for you to think about as well. Please help us. Be together with us. Thank you.
So I'm going to take you briefly back to the early months of 2014. I was in my second NATO ministerial meeting as a defense minister, and Russia annexed Crimea as we sat in the meeting room. And I remember saying that when the dust settles on this one piece of historical, I would say, really dramatic piece of history, Russia will still be the single biggest strategic challenge for NATO. And I think it's important to remember in this regard that none of us can escape our geography, whether we like to or not. And reminding Iceland, as every other country, that you are important in this. And the reason I'm saying this is that Iceland plays an extremely important strategic part in the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap, where we now, everyone, try to avoid new Russian submarines from being able to hamper the sea lines of communications. They can effectively commission new submarines in a way that makes it almost impossible to receive the Allied reinforcements to our part of the world, to Europe. This is a huge strategic threat. It also means that Iceland, as all of us, has a responsibility to make sure that this geographical location, be it a blessing or a curse, is something that is important in the defense of allies. The second thing I would like to underline is how important it is to think critically, as we all have to, about not only the conventional military threats, but also the hybrid threats. And in today's world, that is everything from influence operations to purchase of critical infrastructure from China or from Russia. None of us can be under the illusion of China or Russia or other actors that we don't have a security policy cooperation with, would like to buy typically an Icelandic port or a Norwegian port because they would like to develop Norway or Iceland. They're doing it primarily and solely because of their own strategic interests. And that is potentially a danger for all of us. And the stronger the foothold of countries we don't have a security policy collaboration with in our countries, the more vulnerable we are, the more dependencies we create, and the more difficult it is when the crises occur to actually do what we should do as allies. So I would just like to say to all of us, actually, not only Iceland, we all have to play our part. We all have to shoulder that responsibility. That is what being allies is all about, whether it's much or little. We have to make sacrifices, all of us. And just like Irma says, we are now also ramping up our defense spending as all countries. That means that we have to prioritize something else down. We're spending less on health or less growth on education because we've decided that this is the most important thing we can do to defend our values and defend our allies. It's tough. Everyone seems to agree right now. Give it 2 years, 5 years. It's more difficult. But this is the obligation that we have towards our people and the coming generations. And everyone has to take its part.
Thank you. I'd like to echo all that has been said, but I've been to Iceland for, I think, 6 or 7 times, and I believe that you have a lot to educate and to learn the rest of us also when it comes to exchange best practices, educational cooperation, and not at least research and development in several aspects. But if one advice that we can give each other as a Nordic family that we are, it is the point about de-risk and reduce the influence of China. Of course, we've touched upon that earlier today as well, because we have been there. Michael mentioned the new Danish adaptation of the new legislation, and we also in Sweden have adopted a new legislation regarding screening and to try to prevent foreign investments in critical infrastructure with the target, of course, China. So I would like to encourage to engage with, for example, our counterparts and friends in the US when it comes to their Committee on Strategic Competition towards the Chinese Communist Party. That they have a really lot of experience and knowledge in this regard, and contribute to deterrence in telecom infrastructure. I think that's crucial in our part of the world to try to reduce the influence of Huawei and others, and try to find better solutions together, because we are stronger together. I mean, together we are the 11th biggest economy in an international level, and we have each other's back and each other's shoulders. So we have the opportunities, we have the possibilities. It's about strength and strategic cooperation where there are alternatives while time is, so to speak. So thank you.
Well, if we look through history, I think a lot of Danes have, had a bad foot coming to Iceland and coming with suggestions of what you should do. So I don't think I'm the best one to do it, but I will just come with two personal focus points. One is don't be naive. You can sense that you are far away, but you aren't far away. As my Norwegian chairman colleague precisely said, you will be one of the first targets, because if Iceland is taken over, then it will be impossible for US to supply us with necessary goods in a combat situation. So you are strategically one of the most important countries in Europe. That's also one of the very, very important points that we have from the Danish side regarding Faroe Islands and Greenland. We are expanding right now. We're building up a new military radar installation in the Faroe Islands, and in Greenland we are expanding our military defense a lot. We're also looking into how we can build even more combat-ready frigates that have more firepower than the ones we have right now to patrol in the area regarding Faroe Islands and Greenland. So we are also in your backyard expanding our defense, because we are not naive, and we shouldn't be naive. And then the other thing is Ukraine. We hope we will never have to use our own defense in any situation. But the only way we can say that is because we still haven't made sure that Russia could take over Ukraine. We have stopped Russia in Ukraine. So help us in that regard. You are a pretty rich country. You're actually quite rich country. Help us, in trying to get the Danes' #1 position. Why not? In supplying the most to Ukraine per GDP. It is the fight right now for all of us is right now in Ukraine. Help us in winning that war. Thank you.
The challenge was to give advices to you. My only advice is listen us. We have certain experiences you can learn. That's the only advice I can give to you. They will ask also about the Russians. I quote, because Ronald Reagan was mentioned here a few times earlier, what he said in 1979. He said very clearly, do you really think so that there is a people who is genetically would like to be slaves instead of free? I actually I invited as a chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of Finland, Yulia Navalnya and Vladimir Kara-Murza to Helsinki a week ago. Amazing, emotionally strong visit. And the basic message from their side was, there is another Russia. That's why my thoughts are very clearly so, building the world in, once again repeat, building the world on contradictions and trusting only on armaments, that's not the future. We must actually still build the world to cooperation, because there are challenges for whole mankind, including our existence as humans, that we should cooperate. That's a basic approach from my side. Then question concerning somebody said, you asked me, do you think that Russia will lose the war? I didn't raise my hand. Why? Because you should define what means losing the war. My argument is very clear. I analyzed quite a lot history and I know quite well. Russia has actually lost the war already. Ukraine has already won the war. Why I say so? What is in behind? 2005, Vladimir Putin made a speech for the nation and he said, the biggest geopolitical catastrophe of last century was collapse of Soviet Union. That was the message. Actually, I have responded publicly in Council of Europe when that point was set, actually discussing about this issue. I said to the Russian delegation then there, that actually wasn't actually the biggest geopolitical catastrophe. Absolutely the biggest geopolitical catastrophe last century, at the end of last century, was that the Michael Gorbachev's plan, discussion of Общий Европейский дом, common European home, didn't materialize. You would be part of the Europe normal ways, behaving like we all are behaving. That would be the solution, obviously, but you are not. And that's now the situation that we see the situation. And we were somewhat naive. I personally was a naive, thinking in 1990s that when a big empire, Soviet Union, collapsed, that actually happened quite relatively smoothly. Because the history behind is that big wars, all big wars of 19th century, 20th century also, all before, they actually were collapsing empires and the whole globe was involved on it. First World War, Second World War, etc. Now happens so the regional conflict, yes, empire and Balkans collapsed, Yugoslavia, we had a wars there, but suddenly this is actually quite peaceful. So the peace structures are working well in Europe. Oh, of course, Chechnya, of course, South Ossetia, the Tatarstan issue, the Transnistria, South Ossetia, etc. Big empire anyhow, not a major war. And now we see the reality. This is the last battle of collapse of Soviet Union we are now witnessing in Ukraine. And Ukraine has won it already. Why? Similar way like when Finland won the Winter War, 13th of March 1940, we had all the poles in half-mast flag poles, and we were very sorry. I lost my Karelia. You lost your country also. After the Second War, we lost our Karelia. I'm from Vardberg. My parents are from there. We lost it, but we won. We won, actually. It was a defensive victory. Never we lost sovereignty. Our existence as a nation was there. Finland, Helsinki, London, and Moscow were the only capitals we haven't occupied during the Second World War. So actually it was a defensive victory. And Ukraine as a nation has been absolutely created now. Absolutely created that now. Ukrainian national identity, I have been so many times to Ukraine last week, and also I know it quite well. It hasn't ever been so high as today. Whatever happens in terms of battlefield at the end, Ukraine will stand as a nation. So in that way, they have won it already. And now it's only a question that let's get rid of this bloody aggression as soon as possible. Thank you.
So, thank you, dear friends, dear guests. This meeting has been exceptionally good, and I would like to thank our foreign friends for taking time out of their busy schedule to be with us today. And as a gesture, I would like to thank them personally by giving them Icelandic energy for their busy day ahead. This has become a joke in our long friendship, because I always bring Icelandic energy drinks to all meetings, and they call it They call it volcano juice. So for the day, I am bringing you Icelandic energy. Have a great visit in Iceland and thank you for this meeting. Thank you.